Hello and welcome back to the Layback podcast. Joining us today is Trey Martin. Trey Martin is a physical therapist that you probably better know as Athlete Doc Rehab, especially if you're on Instagram, TikTok, probably every other social media, YouTube. And he also has something else in the works, which is MPH Arm Care. It's an app he developed, is really targeted youth high school baseball training, and I'll probably continue to butcher an intro if I don't just kick it over to Trey right now. So Trey, thank you very much for coming on today, and please tie up any loose ends that I might have left for you.
Yeah, man. Thanks so much for having me on. Actually, the intro is pretty good. That's pretty much the full thing. Athlete Doc Rehab has been my social media account for the last, gosh, I think I started in grad school, so I think I'm on year 7 now. And then MPH, we launched that about a year ago now. So that's pretty much yeah, you actually nailed the intro pretty well there.
All right, I'll take it. And then I think it would be wrong of me not to mention that we just spent an hour shooting the shit before we actually got started today. And if we would have recorded that, yeah, we probably would have had to cut some names out, but that probably could have been a podcast in itself. So I don't know if we kind of want to pick up where we left off in discussing whether it is your route into MPH. It's not actually miles per hour if we want to get started on that right away,
Yeah.
or if there's another route you want to go down.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can back up and kind of tell the PT origin story too.
Sure. Yeah. Start there. That's probably even better.
So pretty much every baseball turned PT guy, like at some point you get injured, you wind up going to PT. For me and like everyone that plays baseball knows, like we were very superstitious people. So when I was in high school, hurt my shoulder as a catcher, I went to PT. I saw her maybe like 3 times, and I hit like half the home runs of my life during the 2 weeks I was seeing this lady for PT. Like literally, I saw her, I think 3 visits. And over that stretch, I was like 10 for 12, like 4 bombs, a bunch of RBIs. You'll have to ask your boy Kevin Kane about it at some point. So just unreal hitting for a while. And I was never a great hitter. So then I go to college. I'm playing at Trevecca in Nashville. And the first day of school, they're like, all right, go pick your major. And I'm like, I don't know what I want to do with my life. I never even thought about this. And they're like, well, if you're playing a sport, maybe go look at exercise science. Like, go over there, meatheads. This is where you belong. First day of class, I basically was like, well, I'm going to go see what exercise science is. I remember liking my PT. Like, this lady was a miracle healer. She did some weird witch magic on me, and I started hitting home runs, and I wasn't a good hitter. So clearly there's something to it. So then that kind of got me on this path of no return, where it was like I took too many prereqs, and then I'm like, okay, I gotta do this PT thing now. And then when I got into PT school, I would sit in the back of class and read like baseball research. So I was reading like all the Fleissig, Escamilla, Reinhold, and Lenny and those guys. Like I was reading all of their content, a lot of James Andrews stuff too. And then that kind of got me into the idea of like, okay, well, why don't I tie up all the things that I like? Like I liked the physical training, like strength and conditioning aspect of stuff. I was training some guys at this time. I liked the idea of like the PT and health side of stuff. And then obviously I still loved baseball, even though my career kind of flamed out in an epic fashion that we can touch on a little bit later. So it just seemed like a perfect fit overall. And then, in school, I wound up getting to go intern for Mike Reinhold and all those guys up at Champion. So that was kind of my intro into like baseball PT, and the fact that you could do PT not just for elders with knee replacements and hip replacements, like you could actually help like young kids with arm injuries stay healthy and stay on the field. So that was kind of the origin story of the PT existence. And then to kind of tie that up, like I moved to Florida after I graduated, spent 4 years just kind of doing, I'm sorry, 3 years doing just like normal, maybe a baseball player or two, but I was mainly seeing just kind of back pain, chronic pain, headaches, shoulder surgeries, that kind of stuff. But I was always itching to get back into baseball, and then got kind of fortunate with a couple opportunities to get into that. And then that's been my full-time focus for the last 2 years now.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, you're now in the Orlando area, you're down in Florida, so you are kind of in baseball heaven.
Hmm.
I'm curious what you see most often with baseball players. Are you looking at whether it is the kind of classic overuse injury? Is it high school kids that don't know when to stop? What's kind of your most common client base? And then what maybe ailment are you dealing with most often?
I would say there's two categories. This year, I feel like I always have a growth plate injury on my schedule at all times. Like here in Florida, I feel like it's borderline epidemic levels. Growing up in Tennessee, like we at least had winter, so you didn't really see as much like growth plate problems. I never even saw any of my teammates growing up, no one had a growth plate injury. Here, it's like half the kids have a growth plate injury, it seems like. So I see quite a bit of that. I'm in a cash-based clinic setting, so I don't take insurance. And with that, I think that maybe limits the amount of post-ops I get. And we talked about this before the call, but like I don't tend to get just a ton of like post-op UCL. Generally here, there's a really good group over at Advent Health and Rothman that they do pretty much all the UCL surgeries, and they actually have a really good PT staff there that they seem to get most of them. So I tend to do a lot of interestingly like I don't want to call it like preventative, but I'll see a lot of guys where it's like, hey, I had a little shoulder thing or a little forearm strain or something minor. I want to make sure this doesn't evolve into something bigger. So I have a lot of guys that are almost like you evaluate them, you find some low hanging fruit, maybe mobility or rotator cuff or forearm strength or performance wise. And then I assign them either an online based program to do or they come back in once or twice a month for more maintenance care. That's actually a large bulk. It's probably 50-50 injured people or injured baseball players, and then that kind of like almost performance PT group that's kind of evolving. And then also top of that, I still see some golfers, some football, some normal everyday athletes too. So that's also still a pretty big mix. So at least I don't have to talk to 16-year-old kids all day. I get some balance with some adult exposure, which is nice.
Yeah, you mentioned the private pay and insurance pay. That was a topic on the Nolan Repay episode because it's kind of almost counterculture to be a specialized physical therapist at this point and still be an insurance-based pay practitioner.
Hmm.
But you obviously went the private pay route. It's this kind of niche that you fell into. It enables you to wear a lot of different hats.
Hmm.
So I'd love if you could kind of go into even more detail of how you blend what you're doing both in PT as well as performance training.
Yeah, so there's some definite pros and cons with cash versus insurance based. Ironically, I don't even know how to bill insurance. I got really fortunate. Like in graduate school, I interned at places where it was like it wasn't really my job to do the coding and billing. And if you guys aren't in like medicine, like billing for services and writing notes and all that stuff is most of your job. So if you ever go to a PT in an insurance clinic and he or she's sitting on their computer the whole time not paying attention to you, it's because they're writing notes trying to get paid and keep the clinic on afloat. So dealing with insurance is a beast. But yeah, so I worked with Mike and them. They're cash based. Then my first job here was all cash based. So like I've really not dealt with insurance at all. To this day, I don't even know how to navigate it. The pro though of cash based is there's a lot of freedom on my end of I don't have to worry about necessarily like say you get a referral for shoulder. I can see you for shoulder, hip. We can treat whatever you need that day. Sometimes insurance-based clinics get a little bit limited where it's like their note has to be defended to the insurance company to get paid. So if you have a shoulder injury and maybe your shoulder injury stems from lack of T-spine rotation or a neck issue, they're going to have to treat your shoulder enough that the insurance company says, hey, like we sent you were referred over for this shoulder thing. We're paying you to see their shoulder. Why are you treating their elbow right now? Or why are you seeing them for their neck? So you kind of have to stay on topic there versus cash based, you can be a little bit more whole body approach. If I see a baseball guy, like I measure pretty much every single joint that relates to throwing. We test everything. So there's a little bit of freedom on my end. And also the biggest thing is it allows me to stay one-on-one. You can be one-on-one in insurance pays, but a lot of times the insurance companies don't pay enough for us to see just one athlete at a time. So what you wind up seeing is you have to take on two, three, four, five patients an hour just to keep the clinic afloat. And then it's not that it can't be done. It's hard to maintain quality, at least to me, if I'm seeing four people at the same time. So another freedom too for us with cash pay is it gives me enough time to see you one-on-one, but also craft more of an online based program. So with my clients, I'll see them once a week, twice a week max. And then I have a lot of them doing like an external like rehab program. So instead of me sitting there watching you do your rehab, we'll do a bunch of stuff that you can't do at home with me. And then I'll assign a video guided program that you can go do on your own too. So definitely opens up some freedoms. I think one of the cons we talked about too is it's very hard to get post-op patients to do cash pay because they've already spent $100,000 to meet their deductible on a Tommy John surgery. So like they've already met their deductible, they've already paid a ton, and their surgeon's like, hey, go use our guy. He takes your insurance. They work with us. So that's one of the detractors. I wish I could see more Tommy John, more post-op labrum, more thoracic outlet surgeries. I think it's just a fun thing to deal with over the long term.
And now I'm curious, you mentioned again the ability to do some online work
Mhm.
or kind of give homework to your patients as opposed to the classic handout that I remember getting after my shoulder surgery, like do
Mhm.
these exercises at home, or you met your 10 visits to PT requirement. Here's your workout plan for the next 10 weeks. And it was just ER band, IR
Yeah.
band, the Job exercises or whatever, throwers 10. I'm curious if the ability to tie in that online programming is kind of what led you down the path of creating the app.
Ooh, actually, I don't even think I've put that together in my own brain until you just said that. But yeah, I did online programming for 2 years before I started the app. Mainly because at my first clinic, we would do like a video guided like email home program. And then I started looking at that and like we were hyperlinking YouTube videos. Like it was something, it wasn't optimal. And then I found like True Coach at some point, which is like a platform for adding in exercises, sets, reps, instruction, communication. So I had a probably 20 to 30 online clients at this time. And then I started thinking like, okay, what are the common themes that I'm giving these guys? Like, okay, they're doing X, Y, and Z. Like, could I build this into more of like a generalized version for non-injured guys to keep them from needing me? So that did kind of spawn the app actually. Just I took a bunch of stuff that I was giving people for like in stages of rehab back to return to throw. And I figured, why don't I just give this to people at a higher intensity that aren't injured, and then maybe they won't need to see me anymore. So that's interesting. I didn't really put that together until now, but that was kind of the impetus behind the app, I would say.
That's crazy. I mean, I get it. Sometimes you have to talk things out and it takes years to figure out how you actually got in one place from a previous destination. But how many patients, I guess, then continue to use you for performance training as well?
As far as like in person or more of like online.
Or even remote. I guess I'm thinking back on this kind of cash pay model.
Mhm.
You have periodic check-ins, as you mentioned, or a lot of your athletes are maintenance.
Mhm.
So I'm curious where the if it's just a blurred line or if it is a
Mhm.
true delineation where one of your athletes or one of your patients moves from a return to play into now I do performance training with MPH or performance training with Athlete Doc.
So it is a blurred line and it's kind of intentional too. Like if I can get someone that say first seeing me for an injury and then introduce like, hey, I'm going to program your rehab work on my app. Then when they get towards the end of rehab with me, then it's like, well, hey, why don't you just continue using the app? And I think the app has given me the ability to, like, if say finances are an issue, they have to do more of the work and there's going to be less handholding from me, but I can program out something much cheaper than I can see them in person. So if you're paying a cash pay PT for their time, it gets pretty expensive to see them 3, 4 times a week. Like you're looking at multiple hundreds of dollars to do that. So yeah, I mean a lot of the guys like I try to get them integrated into the app early or at least have them familiar with it, program out their initial work on it. And normally I do that for free. So if I'm seeing them as a patient, I'll write their programming just as like a hey, here's just an extra thing for you to work on. And then it kind of depends from there. Like if it's a referral from say like a strength coach or something like that, like I don't want to overstep with any referral sources I have. So if it's a guy that they already have a strength conditioning guy, then I'm not going to talk to them about, hey, I have a great lifting program and performance on the app. I'll just kind of put them in an arm care bucket. Or if it's a guy that needs it all and he's looking for the full thing, then I'll do it all. But another benefit of cash though is with that one-on-one time. Like tomorrow I have two performance evaluations where it'll look like more of a strength and conditioning assessment. Like we'll still take all the health metrics, the joint range of motions, the HHD, probably even bring out Flex Pro actually to get some ISO testing on them. And then I'll take them through like force plates, some med ball numbers, and then craft a plan from there. So it's a benefit to being able to do both, but I feel like I wind up taking if I have a list of things that I can do for someone, I just wind up kind of matching it to that person in front of me. everyone's kind of on a different routine, different plan. So it makes it exhausting to remember all the things that I offer actually too.
And I'm sure it gets even more difficult on which days you're in office, which days you're
Mm.
going off to the different high schools, or what the intention is with each group you have. So now where my mind is kind of going is when you shift your focus from working with an individual to, I know you also work with teams. So
Mhm.
how does your programming or your structure change, or how can you scale what you do when you go from 1 to 2 patients or athletes at a time in facility to then
Mhm.
going out to the high school and working with an entire program?
So the team-based stuff is so fun, man. Like being around just an entire team of kids. Like you've been around kids that are like 15, 16, 17, 18 now. Like they they talk crap to you, they pick on you the whole time. Like it's a blast being out there with them. So with the team model, what I'll do, especially if it's local, this is going to be my scale challenge actually, but if it's local, I'll go out to them. I try to go every 3 months. It winds up being, every 3 or 4 months, and we'll do an entire team test. So we'll collect force plate numbers, med ball numbers. We'll set up a table and do some of the health metrics. We'll collect some like 5 rep maxes on split squats and deadlifts and bench and rows and things like that. I try to make the assessment where I have at least something from each category. And then we have this massive spreadsheet going of the couple schools I have of just like where they're at. And then we retest every few months. Programming wise, I have the app built right now into it's not necessarily a JV program, but it's more of that like younger kid, like maybe they have a little to no gym experience, and then I have more of like a varsity, like they've been within a program for a year or two program. So I'll assign each kid mainly based on their lifting numbers. So if you're a senior that's just started lifting, you got to start at the beginning. If you're, a freshman that's been lifting for 3 years and you have a good, training under your belt, I'll throw you on the more advanced one, and then I'll match the arm care based on some of the measurements we take too. So that's what I try to do, is to make it like as specific as possible without charging specific prices. Like it's a general program that's generally good for most baseball buckets of performance we need to fill, but it's not necessarily like each guy is getting a custom specific routine, but helps me keep prices down, helps me scale. And then the scale problem will be, how do I get that testing done on a school that's, maybe in Wyoming or New York or Washington or something like that? One thing that's helped me too is with my partners so far, the coaches at the schools have been amazing partners in the sense that they'll make sure the lifts are being done, and they're there like making sure everyone's using good form, and they're very good at like making sure everyone stays on it. So I really enjoyed teams more than individual sales, because individual you don't have that accountability of like, hey, you and your three buddies from Winter Park High are going to go hit the lift together at Crunch today and then track it and push each other. If it's just some kid that's using it in Pennsylvania, he's accountable to himself. So the team has kind of been allowing me to get some coach feedback, get some players kind of grouping up, and I think that's kind of where the model will go, is selling as a system to teams.
I'm guessing you also have to dive into the education aspect for the coaches or
Hmm.
whoever's on staff at a school to a certain extent. So what does that look like for you? Are you on Zooms with coaches or FaceTimes? Because I know, yeah, you can program a rear foot elevated split
Mhm.
squat, but Joe Schmo from whatever school out in whatever state just wants to see weight on somebody's back. They don't know
Yeah.
what it should look like or the pace that it should be done. So how do you handle that education piece?
The nice thing is I love the RPE scale in general, or like a reps and reserve model. So if I can get the coaches to understand that like, hey, I'm shooting for an 8 out of 10 RPE here, they shouldn't be failing their fifth rep. Like it should be a pretty smooth fifth rep, and they could have gone for a couple more. When I get them to understand that piece, and we can kind of let the players auto regulate on days they're fresh, they lift a little bit more. If they're really fatigued, it's their 8 out of 10 that day. I think that helps a lot with player safety. I rarely have guys going up to true tens. To me, from what I've read in literature as far as for muscle growth and strength adaptation, like you don't get a ton of extra benefit from going from like a 7, 8, 9 to a 10. So if I can minimize risk to these kids that, I may never meet, I don't want, some kid in Mississippi, like blowing out his knee going for an RPE 10, and then have that on my conscience and find out that he blew out his ACL trying to hit a max. But yeah, I've been fortunate. It seems like the coaches I've worked with so far, there's like at least one on staff that, has some lifting experience or has a background in it. So I at least know that they're helping keep player safety at the forefront. And then also everything's video guided too. So there's a demo video of me being like, this is how this should be done. And there's some instructions too in the app of like, if I want a tempo, like I want you to lower at 3 seconds, pause at the bottom for 1, come up at 3. I'll mix in some triphasic type aspects too. So but that's been the biggest, I think, worry for me is just kind of programming for a bunch of people that I don't know necessarily. I think the safety aspect is something that I'm like, okay, I hope everyone does an 8 out of 10 or a 9 out, like they don't actually push to failure all the time. But that's an area that we're kind of actively on the talking to the coaches frequently, trying to keep up with them, make sure that no one's doing anything crazy. But these are high school kids that I'm dealing with mainly, so I'm sure there's been some ugly bench presses done somewhere at some point. I just hope I don't have to see it.
Yeah. Uh, I'm caught up in thinking about the day that you had to film all of these exercises. I'm sure that was the single toughest workout or toughest consecutive days you put together was this is the back
Yeah.
squat, this is front squat, this is split
I
squat.
didn't put weight on the bar. That helped a lot. I was just doing empty bar, but yeah, that story was funny because originally we talked about this a little bit before the call. Like I built the app to be like arm care and mobility and health and like more of like a PT kind of thing. And then my first school that I started doing performance with, they're like, look, can you write us like a full like gym thing? We want an entire system to run. And you know how it is in business. Like I'm not gonna tell them no. I'm like, yeah, we could start Monday. Like, really? So I'm like, okay, I got 5 days to do this now. So I went to thankfully I have this great gym that's like super quiet. And if you go at the right time of the day on Sunday, you can get like an hour of two where it's just you. So I set up my camera and I filmed, I mean, gosh, 150 videos or something like that. And I mean, and even I've still added some to it since, but yeah, I was sore after that. Even just doing, 5 reps of empty bar squat and 78 variations gets kind of hard after a while.
Yeah, big volume day right there.
Oh yeah. The pump was
Yeah.
great though. It was amazing. Actually, the jumping was the hardest part too. There's a lot of jumping and explosive stuff on it and like doing like an unresisted jump or I mean just that for I mean I was there probably 4 hours I think. So it was a good leg day.
My gosh. Yeah, that sounds like my nightmare because then you also don't get the ego component of putting weight on the bar. So then when you tell people you're sore the next day, you're just like, how much
Yeah,
weight you do? Don't worry about
45.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did 45 pounds a bunch of different ways.
Yeah, for 4.5 hours.
Well, then you
But
get subconscious too of like or self-conscious of like I like everyone moves a little differently. I'm not a great mobility guy. Like I'm a catcher by heart. Like I move like a catcher, and then you're like, crap. Like I think I can demo most of these things fairly well, but there's even some that I'm like, all right, a normal high school kid that's an athlete, they could do this easily. But like I'm getting old now, Like there's a little bit where I'm like, oh geez, I don't know if I have very good form on this anymore.
this is a little bit separate, and I know I'm going down a now mobility rabbit hole, but the other day I was talking to a guy about hip internal and external rotation, and I went to go show him like a movement to help with hip internal rotation. In in the video, I had to be like, look, I also do this because I don't really have good hip internal
Uh-huh.
rotation. So it shouldn't look like this, but this little line I'm drawing on the video, this is the shin angle I want you to have, but I can't get there.
He's like, I want you to be better than me, but this is how it's supposed to look.
Yeah, this is the intent you should have. You shouldn't have to grimace as much as I'm grimacing to try to kick my leg out the way that I need you to kick it out.
I think along that train of thought, like I've started doing my own program a lot more. Like I used to do it some, and then I would, I mean, it's built for like if you want to throw a baseball really hard, and I'm at the stage of life where it's like I don't. I just want to like look like I'm in good health, I guess. But I started using my own training program more and more just to kind of get that like practice what you preach, show that you can do it. I've been doing a lot more like FRC style mobility work too, because it just gets kind of awkward if you're like, look, kid, you need to do this. And they're like, You can't do that. Yeah, so you got to keep up to have the high school and college age kids thinking that you still got it a little bit.
Well, you definitely have to, given your social media presence as well. I mean, this is kind of the perfect tie-in when you're showing your videos of how
Mm,
to increase max action rotation, or some of the great content you've put out about thoracic spine
hmm.
mobility and utilizing that as a tool. I think I provided enough of a segue for you there, but I'd love for you to kind of tie in what building this social media presence has looked like for you.
Yeah, the irony of the social media stuff is not everything is how it looks. Like if I'm doing a video about like overhead range of motion, for instance, if I throw it all, my lat locks down and I have like 150 degrees of overhead range. Like my shoulder range is crap normally. So I'm warming up before videos. It's not like I'm going in cold and being like, oh yeah, here's this drill. Like I've foam rolled my lat, worked out my T-spine, done some lifting, and I film at the end once I'm good and warmed up. Like at the end of a lift is typically when I film. So yeah, I'll do that just to kind of look like I'm in better spots. But walking around day to day, it's like the shoulder doesn't really work as well. But yeah, social media has been I call it a frustrating blessing. I started it my second year of PT school, mainly because I saw like the Cresties of the world and the Reinolds and some of those guys, like they had a big presence. And one thing I thought back then was like, okay, well, even if I know a lot, if I'm saying it in an elevator to one person, like I can't have a big impact. So I kind of saw early from those guys, like, okay, like they do seem to know a lot, but they're also getting their message out to hundreds of thousands of people. So I started just posting. I think I've archived or hidden all the videos I was posting back then because they were so bad. If people are thinking about starting social media, like just start flinging some stuff up there. No one's watching anyway for the first 2 or 3 years. And I just posted some, I don't know, some shameful level videos because I was a student in PT school. I didn't know crap at this time, and I'm like, okay, let's throw that out there. But social media is an amazing tool in the sense that like we talked about before the call, like it gives you some credibility that is both deserved and undeserved. It's a nice way to kind of package and showcase, like, this is what I believe and this is what I teach. And here's even some snapshots of what I do with a client during a day. But I do feel like it gives people a little bit of that, like, oh, you got some followers, like, you must be an expert at this. And it's like, there's probably tons of guys that are never post online working at some clinic somewhere that know a ton of stuff, but the unfortunate thing is if you can't get your message out there and you can't be heard, maybe you're not going to make the impact that you could, even with the knowledge base that you have. Social's frustrating though, because like as if you post a lot, you'll see the algorithms go up and down, and you'll post a video and it'll get a million views, and then you'll post the exact same style of thing and it'll get 800 people watching it, and so it's definitely a roller coaster, but I'm super glad that I started it because it allows me to connect with people like you and some of the other people we talked about earlier. Like it just gives you it gives you a network just through Instagram DM or like sending each other posts. It's a really powerful tool for sure.
Yeah, I like to think of it kind of like a working resume or an active
Yeah.
resume, in the sense that you can always find what you want to find. And
Hmm.
that's the beauty of staying active on it. And you can treat it somewhat as a confirmation bias, or oftentimes that I know that's even what you said before we started recording is I heard about it from somewhere else. I heard
Hmm.
good information, then I look for the good information. Or I
Hmm.
heard some crap about it. Let me go see if I agree with the crap, and like, yeah, this sucks. So you can use it for whatever you actually want to use it for. But
Hmm.
going back to the positives, I'm not great at social media by any means, but I try to use it as a platform to show what we have going on, or what's in the works, what's coming, what we've done. And I think that's like a comfortable niche for me,
Hmm.
because then it is just showing we are continuing to put in work, or we're trying to better ourselves. Or like when we got connected for the first time, it was through social media.
Hmm.
You were able to at least see enough of what we did on there, see a couple pictures of the device, or of course, it's hard when it's on an app, and unless you have screen
Hmm.
recordings, you can't always see what's going on. But then I can look at your videos and say, like, all right, this guy can, at a minimum, talk the talk, he can
Hmm.
walk the walk, he gets baseball and he knows how to communicate. That to me checks the box of a resume as opposed to having to request you to send something or
Yeah.
have to go off to a website. At least it's all hosted in one specific location.
Well, I think too, even like I saw you guys through Medicine Through Movement at first. I think there's a pro and con of even that too. Like where I saw him post it, and then if you have a profile of like his size, like I know companies will send him probably free stuff. So I'm like texting him, I'm like, yo, dude, like, do you actually like it? Like, I know you posted it. Let me know for real. And he's like, I paid for it myself. I believe in this thing. I love Flex Pro. And I'm like, okay. I'm gonna get one now. I want to talk to you. I think the pro and the con is like there are some people in the call them like the influencer space where it's like you get paid enough money and you're like, oh my God, I love X, Y, and Z product. And they're just shilling out for the dollars really, and they don't really mean it. So I think that's kind of the pro and con is like the pro is like I can check behind the scenes and be like, hey man, what do you think about this on a real level? But then the con is like obviously there's some companies that like people will be like yeah I love this device, this is the greatest thing I've ever used in my life, and they're just saying that because they got it free and paid a couple grand a month or something like that. So I really liked with you that you're like, look, we don't pay any of our people, like if you want it you got to pay full price and then let me know if you like it later and then we'll figure out something. So I think it's a good way to be because I think there's some muddled stuff in the influencer space for people, prop up products that they don't even actually use. And for me, being on that like kind of micro influencer front, like if I'm not using it and liking it, I'm not going to post it either. So I'll turn down most of the, it's mainly CBD for some reason, but I always get pitches of like, do you want to try our pain-free relief? Like I'm not going to sell out and post that stuff unless it's like oh, I've been using this with my athletes and this, I actually like this product.
Yeah, and you brought up the term influencer. I think, or at least how it works in my mind, is there is a distinct difference between being an influencer and being an ambassador. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like being an influencer is whatever, you have all these followers, you just shout to the masses something that you're willing to just
Mm-hmm.
kind of rep for, and you don't really believe in it. To me, I'd have to look up the specific definitions for sure.
Yeah.
This is not an English podcast, or this is not a thesaurus by any means or a dictionary. But when I think of the term ambassador, I like to think that somebody took that on their own, and they develop a passion for it, a belief in it, and they're willing to bang for it.
Mm-hmm.
They're willing to shout from the rooftops to the masses that this is something that they truly believe in instead
Mm-hmm.
of something that they're just willing to slap a sticker on.
Yeah. I think you're spot on with the term ambassador because I think that's what like with Medicine Through Movement, like I've seen him post for probably 6 months now, and it's like, okay, I trust what this guy says. Like I can tell he's putting in the work, and then he believes in this product. So it's like I believe him as an ambassador. So it's hard to find those people that have that like authentic presence on there. But one thing I've seen too, some companies do that's a little sketchy is like they'll give away a bunch of stuff, and then they'll be like, oh, look, the Yankees use our product. And it's like, well, yeah, you shipped them 3 dozen for free. They never even opened them, and then you're just like, oh yeah, we're the official provider of the Yankees now. Like there's a lot of I guess smoke and mirrors online now, unfortunately.
I think you have a great opportunity to speak on it because of your online presence. And I think it is the idea of growing a personal brand or creating that resume that you're willing to show to the masses because you have to be authentic.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, you said you've pulled some information off, but that's because you think you made a crappy video or
Yeah.
that information is no longer relevant.
Mm-hmm.
So, how, when you go through the process of making content or making videos, do you stay true to yourself and ensure that you're showing something
Mm-hmm.
that not only serves the purpose of spreading business or
Mm-hmm.
creating maybe profit in the long run for you, but also supports your mission as a clinician, practitioner, as athlete doc rehab to get athletes healthy?
Well, I think that's like the there's always like the devil and the angel on your shoulder, like the old cartoons where it's like, and I think I even probably 6 months to a year ago, I felt like with my content, I was getting a little too far, like oh, this one drill is going to help you throw harder and stay healthy. I started posting that, and you get a lot of views on that. And it's like I don't know, a hip airplane. Great drill. Not going to probably make you throw any harder. Like maybe you'll feel a little bit better, move a little bit better. So I've kind of brought back some of my language on Instagram lately. And there's a post I made where it was like, on my voiceover, I was like, hey, this band drill is going to help your elbow feel a little bit better. It's not going to be a cure-all. And that one got a ton of like, hey man, thanks for not being like, making this a big like hyperbole. Like this seems cool. We got a lot of feedback and DMs from that where they were like, hey, I'm just glad someone's not making it seem like you're curing cancer with this one, hip internal rotation stretch. So I've tried to dial that back down. Like the older I get and the more established I get as a brand of being more, hey, like these drills together will help you. It's for X, Y, and Z, but it's not going to be some magical pill. And mainly the one thing that shifted for me is I was getting a ton of messages saying, hey man, what's one exercise I can do to fix my shoulder pain and throw harder? And I'm like, dang, like I'm part of the problem for why these kids think that there is one exercise to fix all these things. Like I'm posting too much that sounds like that clearly, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that. And I was getting just a ton of, hey bro, can you send me a drill to fix my elbow? And I'll like talk to these kids and I'm like, yo, dude, you need an orthopedic. This sounds like your UCL's torn. I think I've diagnosed 3 or 4 torn UCLs through DM alone. Not like formally, but I'm like, hey man, that sounds like an orthopedic issue. 3 months later, yeah, it was I had Tommy John last week. Thanks for telling me. But when I started getting more and more of that, like, hey, I'm looking for this magic thing, I'm like, okay, I got to start talking more about like if you want these results, you got to put in the work, and it's lifting, it's nutrition, it's getting good sleep. It's a lot of boring stuff that kids don't want to hear. Like I'll get more questions on, do you think this amino acid supplement is going to be the greatest thing ever? Or do you think if I did water bags and plyo balls, am I going to throw harder? And I'm like, there's like 99% of stuff that makes you a good athlete. And maybe the amino acids and the water bags and the plyos, maybe that's the final 1%. But if you're not having a good base of sleep, you're not in the gym training hard, you're not working on mobility, you're not doing your arm health, arm care metrics, you're not going to get very far. So I've started trying to kind of bring myself back in and be like, hey, look, this is all the big boring stuff you have to do. And occasionally here's a little sprinkle of the fun stuff too. Everyone wants a quick fix. Everyone wants to throw 95 and they're like, why am I not throwing hard yet? Throwing a baseball hard is very difficult to do.
I'm curious what you think people in a position of education can do to kind of quell this issue or
Hmm.
ensure that athletes are making good choices or
Mhm.
understand that it is a long, arduous process to throw harder. Yes, there
Yeah.
are things that you can probably do in a week and you might throw 1 to 2 miles per hour
Mhm.
harder. But those things that you do in the week are you probably ate really well, you probably slept really well, and you had a stress-free week. So that's
Mhm.
awesome. And then they think they lost the velo and they need another quick fix when they
Mhm.
throw 3 miles per hour slower the following week, but it's because they had 4 exams, girlfriend broke up with them, and they
Always
got
the
2 hours
girlfriend,
of
right?
sleep always.
That's the biggest velo killer I've seen is sleep and then girlfriends, I think. Like kids will be like, yeah, I was 85 and now I'm 82. What's going on? I'm like, did you get dumped last week? They're like, yeah. I'm like, all right. So I think it's a hard question that I don't really know if this problem will get fixed. And like I think if you take like velocity as like the proxy for this topic here, even I got like an armcare.com ad the other day, and it was like gain 4 miles per hour in 10 weeks. Armcare.com at the base is I want to help you guys reduce injuries, but like in fairness to them, and I do this too, you can't sell prevention and wellness and
No,
health. No one cares. Like it's sad to say, but if I'm like, look, this program will definitely get you 10 miles per hour, but you're gonna have a 90% shot, you're gonna blow out your elbow. I would sell that thing like crazy. And it's just sad though. Like people don't fear Tommy John as much as they should because a lot of people have successful returns and come back throwing harder, but there's still 10, 15, 20% of people that never make it back to the field the same or never make it back to the same high level. So I think when you look at like the velocity discussion, like all of us are propping up velo and like we're like, oh, our product's gonna help you throw harder. And the other thing too I thought about the other day is like, and I do this, like I posted a kid that went from 88 to 93 this summer in about 2 months. He's been using the app. He's been working hard with his pitching coach too, that I know. But 5 mile per hour jump in 2 months. Of course, I post that kid. And I'm like, look at these results. This is incredible. But I think what that does is me and everyone else like me, we're all showing the big jumps and the crazy transformations. And I think we should, but I think we need to start posting more of like, Johnny grinded this summer and he went from 80 to 82 in 3 months, and that's a win. I think there's just too much of like, hey, well, that guy gained 5 miles per hour. Why did I not? And a lot of times, like the kid that gained 5 miles per hour, like he's an absolute dog. Like he's at the gym 2 hours training his butt off. He deserved every bit of it. And then I'll have some kids that are just not, and they're like, why am I not getting his results? And I think as an industry, we need a little bit more of like a realistic timeline of what velocity gain can be. And I think like everyone just focusing in on that so much is the end all be all. And I think this maybe even comes from like the college coaches only care about velocity. My players say that when I talk to college coaches, most of them say that too. They're like, I don't even care what the guy's pitch looks like. Can he hit 88 or can he hit 90 or can he hit this? So I think the kids have responded with like, I have to throw hard at all cost. And then there's this kind of battle that I'm seeing between like, there's the older pitching coaches that are, they pitched in the big leagues in 1980 and they're like command mentality, pitch shape, or different pitch mix. And then the younger guys are like, I'll help you throw harder flat out. Who are the kids going to pick to pay? They're gonna be like, I want that guy that's going to get my velocity up. I don't care about old Greg there that I learned how to not walk a guy. They don't care. I don't know. I don't know if it can be combated because obviously like velocity is a huge part of the game. We'd be lying if we said it just make you effective. I was a hitter, my whole life. I never really pitched. You give me a guy throwing 82, I don't care what his off speed looks like. I'm not stressed. I know I could react to anything. You give me a guy throwing 92, it can be flat. I don't know. He could throw a little crappy curveball, but I'm sitting here geared up and tense. So, I mean, velo plays, but I just think that's going to be maybe the impossible thing to fix is we're all selling how to increase your velo. And that's kind of where the game's at. And I don't know if that's just going to be what happens. Maybe it's just we all gain velo and our Tommy John rates continue to skyrocket. I think the only way to probably prevent that is intense workload management, people focusing on the boring stuff like sleep, nutrition, and then also being okay not ripping the quick fixes on velocity. Because there are some, like you said, I mean, you could throw weighted balls for 6 weeks and you'll probably throw harder. Your probably injury risk is going to be higher, but you'll probably throw harder. So, I mean, there's some ways to kind of trick it, or you could do like French contrast training for 4 weeks. And yeah, you might, if you're training for a showcase and you want to, put up some numbers, maybe do that. But it's not a long-term stable growth and velocity. And I think it's just hard too to get kids excited about their average velocity going up. Every kid's like, I hit 92 that one time with the wind at my back. That's great, man. Where do you sit? Oh, I sit 87. Okay. So you're 86 to 88 in game, really? And they're like, yeah, but I hit that 92 that one time. So now I throw 92. One pitch a year doesn't mean you throw that hard, I don't think.
Honestly, the same thing with your max in the weight room. Nick
Yeah.
Sirio brought this up in a couple conversations I've had with him. It's like, hey, what's your bench max? What's your deadlift max? Okay, great. That was on that one day where you absolutely crushed it. Now,
Mm-hmm.
what'd you do the next week? What'd you do the week after that?
Yeah.
And to hit these PRs, everything has to go right.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that maybe a mission as a whole that we can all take on is stressing the importance of what's the floor? What do you never drop below? What is your average? What do you do most often?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that consistency piece is key, but you absolutely nailed it when you said prevention doesn't sell. Safety doesn't sell either. It's not cool to be safe. It's cool to have that flash in the pan, unbelievable
Mm-hmm.
100 on the radar gun instead of whatever. This guy's really consistent because you know what? It stinks for most people to hear, and for us in our world that we live in, where FlexPro Grip was originally designed just to reduce the risk of UCL tears by
Yeah.
getting a very specific musculature strong. But people don't care about that. They want to know what it can do for spin rate or
Mm-hmm.
velo or all those different things. Or can it be added as this performance tool?
Mm-hmm.
Which, yeah, there's pieces of that, but also like we go back to why we started it. I'm sure why you got into physical therapy. Like you said,
Mhm.
keep people healthy, get people back on the field. But when we even talk about doing things safely, we even need to, like, I'll admit it, in our programming, what we need to do is constantly have a tie back into performance. How does
Mhm.
this get people better? And when you were talking about the intense workload management or these different things, I think the education kind of needs to come through how do we build the better base
Mhm.
and how do we create a more strong, robust system that won't break down. So when it matters most, you can throw that 100 miles per hour. You can hit that PR as opposed to one time you did it at a showcase and you got really lucky, or you did it on dad's radar gun. Now you throw 93, even though you sit 86 to 88, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the things too, and I was glad you brought up like spin rate with Flex Pro. Like I think when I view that product, like in my PT mind, I'm like, oh, this is awesome for UCL prevention. It stresses forearm musculature in a way that I just don't feel like you can get with other stuff. I mean, like I'm a big fan of grip and hangs and all that stuff too, and I still utilize that, but it definitely hits differently. But I think if you position to parents like, hey, I have this device that's gonna, we found in studies that if you use it all off season, you reduce UCL injuries over the next season by 25%. Like, say that study comes out next year, that's not gonna move the needle for you guys quite as much as, hey, by the way, this thing increases spin rate on your fastball by 200 RPM. All of a sudden, people are gonna be super thrilled. And I think ultimately, I think a lot of us are doing maybe like the Trojan horse for you guys is like, hey, it'll help your spin rate. And then you get in, and then you're just, in reality, you're like, okay, at least I'm helping elbow health. I'm serving my mission. You got to give them like a little sugar on the way in, a little candy, and then you're like, oh, by the way, here's the medicine now. So I don't know. I think that's kind of, I think maybe that's where like you guys like armcare.com, like I think a lot of us start out with like benevolent goals of like health and wellness. But I think like we've kind of learned, hey, if I talk about health a bunch, I'm not getting to work with people and get them doing my other stuff that'll help them stay healthy. So I don't know. It's kind of the I guess the necessary evil of marketing and sales. But one thing that excites me is, and I think there's this kind of up and coming group of us that are younger and kind of building baseball. We're all talking to each other about what needs to be done. And I think as we all collaborate and grow as brands, eventually we can kind of make that maybe the common message. Get guys fired up on their average velocities.
I don't know if we can ever make that the number one thing, but we can at
Mm-hmm.
least, like you said, ride some coattails and at
Mm-hmm.
least get people talking about it. Because that would be great. And yes, it would be awesome because it also makes scouting easier
Mm-hmm.
if coaches actually know where guys sit. But one of the things that you and I can go back to on the health side is where do people get hurt? They get hurt when they're pushing their upper limits, not when they're riding in a safe zone. People don't pull their hamstrings when they are whatever decelerating. They don't pull their
Yeah.
hamstrings in the first 3 yards of a sprint. It's when they're at top speed that it's
Mm-hmm.
happening 99% of the time. UCL tears. It's occurring when guys are at max intensity, when they're
Mm-hmm.
at maximum layback, and they're experiencing more stress than they've ever experienced before on their elbow. So the body can't handle it. So if we can continue to build, I think honestly, it goes back to making strength training, making the weight room, making performance training really freaking cool. Because the better we get as athletes, the more force that we can handle, the less traumatic injuries we'll experience. We might end up towing the razor thin line in the weight room, but at least when we're performing on the field, those traumatic instances become less common. At least that's where my head goes.
I think with the gym too, I'm really excited about. I haven't gotten to utilize this at scale yet, but like velocity based training is kind of becoming the rage too. And I think back in the day, we were all trying to one rep max increase our deadlift, and you just start doing some sketchy level of lifting to get that PR. But with VBT, at least I'm worried more about the bar speed, and maybe I'm lifting at a safer weight, but I'm also increasing my power output. I think if there was that for throwing, that would be really cool. Just something to where I'll talk to kids on like their return to throw. And I had a kid last week. I'm like, all right, we're first weekend. I don't want you going above 70%. Like his PR back in the like, when he's healthy was like 85. I'm like, you shouldn't be throwing above like 70 realistically. He texts me, he's like, man, I was like 75 the whole bullpen. I don't know what's wrong with my velo. I'm like, are you freaking serious, dude? You just threw for the first time and like, the first time on a flat ground in like 3 months. I don't know. I wish there was something where you could get guys like more excited about going to do like a touch and feel pin at 80% because I feel like throwing, like we're doing 1 rep maxes all the time. And then we're surprised that everyone's elbows hurt. Why is there not like, hey, I throw 80. I'm gonna go throw a bullpen and sit 72 to 75, work on my off-speed pitches. No, if you throw 80, you're sitting in a bullpen trying to throw 80 the whole time for no reason. And it's just, I don't know. I think a lot of it's going to come down to the education at the younger levels and maybe getting kids to kind of understand it because I'm sure the coaches feel like they've been screaming into the void for probably a while now about all this stuff too. I think if we can find that as a tool, like getting them excited about just doing some casual rep work and not going 1RM all the time, that'd be really, really useful.
Yeah, so maybe we as a culture just need to shift to the Japanese approach of you should throw 400 reps a day. It doesn't matter how slow you do it, just throw constantly. And then we'll never deal with overuse injuries either, right? That will be totally fine.
I think that's a concept too that like I go back and forth in my head all the time, and I'm sure like if we brought Casey on this topic, he could absolutely go PhD on it. But I don't know, like I go back and forth of like how much sustainable adaptation can you build without pushing people too hard? Because like if you look at some of the Japanese youth literature, like they're blowing out even more than we are. I
Oh
mean, they're
yeah.
mega hurt. A lot of stories I hear from kids are like, well, I haven't really thrown much in a month, and then I ramped up really fast again, and then I'm hurt. So like you see a lot of those guys that, you know, they don't have the workload built in. So I guess the question is like how do we sustainably get you adapted to throwing hard for long periods of time? And also, what happened to all the guys that could throw 300 innings back in the day? Like, what were they doing? Like, was it just slower? Did they just throw through UCL tears? I don't really know.
Before I just stick my feet in the ground and don't let us go anywhere else, I'll share my last piece on this and we can
Mhm.
kind of jump to a new topic. But that ideology, like
Mhm.
taking both sides, even from should we just accumulate as much work as possible
Mhm.
because then we might be resistant to fatigue or
Mhm.
whatever. If we can get through the dangerous period of building up to this work capacity, we should be able to handle just about anything. Or the
Yeah.
guys that just max out all the time, but their total work capacity might not be that high.
Mhm.
One of the things that we've tried to stay in the middle of with Flex Pro Grip, or I think it really applies to all strength and conditioning principles, is if you can handle the force that the exercise or the activity demands, you technically should be fine.
Mhm.
And then you have to consider what is the max that you might be exposed to, and then what is the duration you might be exposed to.
Mhm.
Max, can you handle the most severe single instant versus the duration? Are you fatigue resistant enough? Do you have the overall endurance? And I'm not just talking about cardiovascular endurance, I'm
Yeah.
talking about the ability to withstand a single event over and over and over and over and over again. If you can withstand that, then you should be okay on the overall fatigue side of things as
Mhm.
well. So that's why I think the performance training aspect is so huge. And yes,
Yeah.
there is throwing fitness. There are specific exercises or activities that you do need to get used to just for overall success. But if your musculature, if your tendons, if your soft tissue is in the right place, handling that really just should be easier.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, and I'm assuming this is kind of intentional with like your product's goals, but like if you think about like handling maximal stress event versus being more of like a durable across a bunch of maybe sub-threshold to even up to max threshold event, if you think about how like the UCL blows out, it kind of fits that too, where it's like sometimes you get that nice, sexy, clean, just blowout, and then sometimes you get that death by 1,000 paper cuts where it's just like shredding over time. So I think that kind of answers maybe a little bit of that too. Like if you can build a higher threshold, but plus also a more durable one across time. I think that's kind of an interesting thing. One thing I'm curious too, and this may be a rabbit hole that's too far to go down, but I'm fascinated with a product like yours taking like, I think you guys maybe are doing this today. I think we talked about this last time, but the concept of like measuring like UCL, I guess maybe not thickness necessarily, but like measuring the UCL and diagnostic ultrasound, getting an appraisal of the health of the ligament via that. I don't know how to do diagnostic ultrasound, so I'm kind of speaking just over my head here. But if you could take a look at how it looked, run like an 8 week block of flex pro grip and then like do, dynamic ultrasound again, are we more stress resistant? Like what's the shear properties of the UCL? Like how does that look? I think you said you guys are doing that with like shear wave elastography, right?
Yes, so that is something we are working on currently with
Mm,
Virginia Tech. We're using ultrasound elastography less for the overall thickness or structure of the
yeah,
ligament because we of course aren't directly targeting the ligament with our training. We're
yeah.
targeting the muscle tendon units that surround the UCL or can support the UCL. So what we are hoping for, or our hypothesis is that with our training, when you reach a certain level, so tying back into what you talked about at the beginning with certain effort levels or percentage of one rep maxes, if you train at or above 70% of a one rep max, you should be able to alter the Young's modulus or
Hmm.
the stiffness, thus the mechanical properties of a muscle tendon unit, making it stiffer, stronger, more resilient, more resistant to stretching, pulling, whatever. So
Hmm.
you're pretty much taking silly putty and turning it into rope. That's the
Yeah.
goal. And we believe at we'll start to see a change at 8 weeks. At least that's what the literature would say that's been done on muscle tendon research.
Hmm.
And we will see a very significant gain at 12 weeks. So now going back into the kind of like strength and conditioning world, early gains,
Hmm.
as they're generally going to be neuromuscular. It's
Yeah.
going to be a new firing pattern. Yes, you are stronger, but
Hmm.
oftentimes it's just because your body learned to fire in a new way. So you made this quick adaptation. I'm sure all of us can go back to the first time we bench press or the first time we squat. And that first month was freaking awesome because you went from 95 pounds to 125 pounds to 145 pounds. Like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be the strongest guy in the world in 2 years.
Yeah.
Um,
I
but
miss
then you
those
plateau.
days.
Yeah, then you plateau.
Yeah.
And although you might be plateauing on the weight increasing,
Hmm.
that's when the muscle tendon unit or the actual properties of that muscle tendon unit are changing
Hmm.
and becoming more resilient. So that's like, yeah, everybody hates a long-term solution, but that's why
Yeah.
we program out long-term training plans as
Yeah.
opposed to, no, do this for 2, 3 weeks, you'll be golden. No, it's an 8 to 12 week program, or that's what it's designed to be because that's how long it takes our bodies to actually adapt.
Yeah, it's a little sidebar on that, but I had a parent last week that they were like, I've had their kid on a program for like 2 months now, and he's been traveling a lot for summer, like he's been playing a lot of tournaments, and she's like, I don't know, I'm just like a little worried he's not really gained velocity yet. And I'm looking and like he hasn't really done that much of the work anyway yet. I mean, he's maybe at a 25% completion rate, but they're like, he should be throwing harder now. And I'm like, we haven't even really gotten to the spot that we're seeing significant, like we maybe have a little bit of like neurologic adaptation, like you're talking about. We haven't even hit like true hypertrophy yet. And there's some other factors too, like nutrition and other things that I'm like, look, he's not put on any weight either, but it's just interesting, like the expectation of like I want that quick fix, and like people probably want with your guys' device, like I want a bulky forearm tomorrow. But yeah, I think it's fascinating too with you guys. Like I think, at least from my general overview of the field, I feel like too many people have been looking only at shoulder, and it just seems like when I start posting like, "Hey, here's a good forearm drill," like before I knew of you guys, like I'd post a flexor pronator, like finger flexor type of thing, and they're like, "Who cares? The shoulder is the only thing that matters." And in my head, like one of the things I'll never forget from anatomy lab or cadaver lab, UCL shreds at like 30 to 35 newton meters of force on a cadaver. And pitching is like, even if you throw about as slow as I do, you're well above 30 to 35. And I think some of the MLB guys get up to like what, like 100, 120
Oh
even?
yeah, if you depending on what research you look at, a 90 mile per hour fastball can be anywhere from 80 to 115 Newton
Yeah.
meters. And it's just what research you look at.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So
if
it
we
should
average it out,
snap every time. And to me, learning about like, well, the FCU helps us in force closure, then you got the pronator mat, like all those things like tie in and give you some active stability. I've never understood why we're not like training the bejesus out of that. And then I'll post it and people are like, oh, the shoulder is all that matters. And I'm like, yeah, ish, but like, why are we not trying to fortify the crap out of the thing that holds the UCL from flying off every time? I don't know. It never made sense. That's why when I saw your product, I'm like, this is what we should have done a long time ago. It's
well,
just getting
thank
people
you.
to do that for 3 months straight in the off season and then maintain in season. You got me thinking though. I'm gonna force some kids into a 12-week Flex Pro off season program.
Yeah, and we can talk about a lot of that stuff even offline. So
Yeah,
I'm sure we'll have a small subset of listeners that like really love that really
yeah.
scientific piece, and they're like, no, keep talking. But yeah, we can continue that conversation. But you brought up the shoulder, so
Mhm,
I'm curious your thoughts on this. There's been research to show over the past, I guess, 10, 15 years, the strong uptick in UCL or elbow injuries, and then the distinct
mhm,
downtick in
mhm,
shoulder injuries. My personal hypothesis of why this is occurring is we have gotten really freaking good at
mhm,
training the body, training the shoulder, transferring force, transferring energy. And because the body works as a kinetic chain or as one
mhm.
unit to transfer energy out to the ball, we have just found the new weakest link with the
Mhm.
elbow. I'm curious if there's anything you think I might be missing there, or if you have another take on why shoulder injuries may be decreasing, whereas elbow injuries have increased.
I agree with that 100%. I mean, and even if you think about how to train the shoulder, like it's a convenient area to train. There's a lot of different things you can do for it. And even like the basic throwers 10 from the 90s, you're going to get some gain off of that. I feel like the forearm and elbow is just a little bit more odd to train. I mean, before I saw your thing, it's like, well, what are you gonna do? Like, you can do some dumbbell pronation supination. Maybe you get wild and throw a fat grip on a band and do some of that. You can. It's just hard to get enough stimulus to that section of the body. To me, with just normal like dumbbell wrist curls just don't feel like enough stimulus to really. And then you're not even really getting finger flexion into that. You're just getting grip. So. I think that's a very plausible reason is that we kind of learned what to do with the shoulder. I'd be curious too, and this is a bit out of my field, but I'd be curious if like the old-timey mechanics was like a little bit more over the top and a little bit more stressful. And maybe now too, with us like increasing velocity and learning how to develop like greater positions, greater ranges of motion, especially into like deep layback, has that just like shifted the stress elsewhere? Like, did the old guys, kind of Iron Mike throw up here, and then now we're like more into, I don't know. I'd have to look back at like what the 70s mechanics looked like. But the thing that fascinates me looking through baseball, just the history of baseball, is how few career-ending elbow injuries it seemed like they had back then. There was some. I mean, like Koufax was kind of known as a guy that probably needed Tommy John before it was a thing. I don't know if they were just built different back then and they were just throwing on shredded UCLs. I mean, I guess you could. But yeah, I mean, I think overall, like, I think we've gotten really good at just even simple band routines, dumbbell routines, and arm care is kind of involved shoulder and scap. I think we've done a good job fortifying that. And realistically, too, I think it's been nice that the surgeons have kind of stopped doing so much labral repairs, too. If you ever see a post-op labral repair guy for baseball, they never throw the same again. So, you
Me,
have
hand
one?
up. Oh yeah, career
Oh,
over after labrum and rotator cuff ended it.
yeah, I think maybe too the surgeons have been a little bit more like, all right, these peel back slap lesions are just everyone has one. Like let's just like let them be for the most part, unless it's just disgustingly unstable. So maybe too we've just kind of let some shoulders just throw through, and then I think maybe with the elbow we've become a little bit more like, hey, we have this tool Tommy John, like let's just go ahead and I guess it's not that bad of a worst case scenario. Another random thought too is I wonder if kids are not doing as much like I don't know, hanging from monkey bars. They're not outside playing. I wonder if like the general physicality of the 15-year-old today is much less than it was 20, 30 years ago. Maybe those guys were all like working on tractors and they're doing a lot of pronation with a wrench, and maybe they just had naturally built flex pro grips for arms back in the 70s. I don't know. I think that's an interesting discussion, though. I agree with your take overall. I think that's probably mostly the reason why we're seeing a drop off in the shoulders.
Yeah, I've got a couple things to share on that. One will be for a future rabbit hole for you to go down, or
Mhm.
any listeners that are interested in old-timey mechanics. There is a group called Delivery Value Systems, or
Hmm.
DVS. They're a training organization. They do a lot of stuff out of Michigan, but their founder is Justin Orndorff. He was an early round draft pick with the Dodgers, big time prospect. And after his career finished, he went on, his life's mission was pretty much to look at old time mechanics and say, like, these are the more efficient ways that we should move.
Hmm.
So it's definitely a cool system. I like learning about it. Pretty much trying to use like energy flows, different stuff like that. So their whole system is based around this mechanical style. And they were plugged in with the United Shores Professional Baseball League for a while, doing a lot of work there. So very unique system that they had for anyone that wants to dig on that. Great people over there. Then when you were talking about hanging or doing these different just daily life requirements, maybe 30, 40 years ago, I guess probably 60 years ago now, we forget that 30 years ago was
The 90s.
1994, not 1974. And then we were talking about the like one quick fix exercise, or like the one thing somebody should
Hmm.
do. I would say if you're under the age of 10,
Hmm.
my number one exercise would be just a dead hang. Just
Yeah,
go
yeah.
hang from something and hang for as long as you can. If you're a listener to the Layback podcast under the age of 10, that is my number one exercise, because you're going to train just about everything. At
Yeah.
least that's my take.
I program that a lot, even for like the adults, even pro level guys, like building into like single arm dead hangs. I mean, if you just think about the position of a hang, you're getting some shoulder mobility from it. You're gonna get a little bit of cuff work. You're gonna get some grip work. Like it's a nice position to get into. I feel like Ben Joyce kind of popularized that too, right? Like when he came out throwing 105, they're like, Ben, what do you do? And he's like, oh, I hang from a bar. There's this orthopedic surgeon that I don't know if he's still alive now, but that was his big thing too. He was convinced that all like shoulder issues could be solved by hanging. And he called it the concept of brachiation, where like if you look at I guess if you went down like the evolutionary rabbit hole, as he was saying, like, well, chimpanzees and our forefathers, I guess, like they hung a lot. And maybe as humans, we're not that far off from primates, so we should go hang from trees all the time. I'll see if I can find the article on him, but I remember reading that, and then the very next patient I saw next week, or that next week, he only had shoulder pain when hanging from something. So I was like, well, okay, well, not the miracle for everyone.
Well, maybe that's when you look at anatomical limitations
Mm.
and doing like
Mhm.
a lateral plank kind of hang.
Yeah,
And for the longest time, that was the only way I could do it when I had limited shoulder mobility. So that was
yeah,
a great unlock for me, getting to the point of being able to work overhead. And
yeah. It was
I,
especially too for guys like you. Yeah, like there are some guys, their shoulder literally can't get into that nice glenohumeral position to even hang properly, and then they just kind of wind up like that. I also like using rings a lot too, because then you
oh
can
yeah,
get into like more of a neutral position, and it's just a little bit more of an easier, I guess, feel for the shoulder at first too.
definitely. Well, now that we've gone down this crazy diatribe, I'll try to bring it back before we finish up. Maybe one more hard question before we get into something fun to finish. But I think because of your unique position, able to work with tons of athletes, you are in the sports haven of the United
Hmm.
States in Florida. I'm curious if there's anything that you think the baseball world can pull from other sports.
Ooh. Two rabbit holes here. One, javelin. I think javelin mobility and like what some like the people are doing to train for javelin has a fascinating crossover for baseball. If you look at Oh, there's this one group that they were doing they had a full-blown like course on like javelin mobility and a book on
Hmm.
it. I think as a whole, like the way they move and train for explosivity is really nice as far as a carryover into baseball. So I borrow some mobility ideas just from the javelin world. I would say as a whole, and one of our biggest problems here, and I'm not really sure if there's a sport doing it better, is there's no off season here. I mean, it's just you can play like kids will play fall all the way up until like November, then they'll do showcases December, January. Then we're back to doing high school ball from January through May, and then summer ball from May again until October. So I think the sports that are allowing athletes to kind of develop into multi-sport athletes, maybe I guess football might be that example. Like I do think as a whole, football does a good job of instilling early like the weight room and strength and conditioning. That's kind of a non-negotiable as a football player. I would say baseball, we've come a long way, and even since I was in high school, as far as that goes. My school was one of the first and only ones that I saw around town where we actually trained in the fall. We would do something, and it was actually pretty good training. We had this old he was a jacked former Army Ranger guy that I remember talking to him at the gym. He's like full conversation with me, benching 315 pounds, like just like, hey man, how's everything going? I'm like, he was a beast. So yeah, I would say like maybe that, like borrowing the strength and conditioning aspect and importance from football earlier on. I think too, like I steal a lot of ideas from watching Christian McCaffrey train, right? I think in baseball, a lot of kids that I talk with, they almost turn into either pseudo powerlifters or bodybuilders. And if you're moving a 5 ounce ball, you should be training to be a freak explosively. So, yeah, I think to summarize, javelin mobility and then stealing some strength and conditioning ideas from the football guys on getting explosive and also being able to be pretty agile too.
I love it. Yeah, I've definitely gone down the javelin rabbit hole on Instagram,
It was
and
all the
I've
rage like a year ago, right?
yeah, I follow some of those accounts, and now, of course, like somehow end up in the algorithm of like guys who throw in like Poland and Lithuania,
Hmm.
and so I don't know,
Are you
but
selling them Flex Pro grips too?
hey, they tear more than the baseball
Yeah.
world does,
Yeah.
and it happens. My guess is it happens because where we go from a lot of elbow flexion into
Mhm.
extension upon release, they go from a lot of extension into insane flexion.
Mm,
It's a weird mechanical thing that I don't entirely know, but because their max layback is also occurring with this maximum extension of
mm,
the arm. I think there's a weird mechanical anomaly that occurs
mm.
there that might be creating greater stress on the UCL. I don't know enough about it, but I definitely need to learn more. We started in the baseball world. Obviously, a lot of people throw, a lot of people grip, so we've
Yeah.
got a lot to learn. There's no question about that.
That's interesting. So you're saying like as they come from extension, they start to move here, then they almost get like a little secondary,
Yeah, that's
secondary layback
from
spot.
my extreme novice perspective.
Mm.
That is my understanding. So it's not like a complete iron mic, but there is
Yeah.
like an external rotation that occurs. But because they're holding that, however much a javelin weighs, they're holding
Mhm.
that spear way above their head, that they're already at this extended position
Mm.
and with a great deal of stretch behind them. So then when they
Yeah.
actually need to thrust it forward, they go into maximum external rotation, creating that torque on the elbow.
I think too, like that's a not entirely the same as that, but like the mechanism of like going into rapid extension even in throwers is being like an injury cause is something that I think a lot of people only think about like that and they forget about the like as you pop into extension. Sometimes that gives some people, especially the guys that are like double jointed and have like all that extra extension, those guys get jacked up from that little like, pop motion, it seems like.
Yeah, like an overuse injury that they're
Yeah.
effectively going through at that point because of the constant collision or
Yeah.
just the rapid bouncing that they then experience. And that's where the bone spurs can occur, the pain
Hmm.
on the backside of the elbow or tricep issues, just because everything is getting crushed on
Yeah.
every release. Hey,
Think
before I
the
let
big
you go,
summary for us here too is that, throwing is bad for you and we're trying to make it a little bit less dangerous. Like I think that's my parents like, I don't know why Johnny's hurt again. I'm like, I don't know how to say this, ma'am, but throwing is it's not good for you. Like,
throwing's really hard.
yeah, yeah, it's a lot of stress. It really is.
Yes. Well, before I let you go, I want to ask you something a little bit lighter. I just want to know something you're excited about this year outside of the baseball world, whether it's travel, whether it's a place you're going to go, somewhere you're going to eat.
I'm getting married next May.
All right.
So yeah, I proposed in Switzerland like a month ago. Yeah, about a month and a half ago, and we're getting married in Italy next May. So it's going to be awesome. It's on this coastline in Italy off the Amalfi Coast in Ravello on this hotel that I guess the Beebs went there for his honeymoon or something like that. But yeah, it's going to be insane. So we're probably going to do 2, 3 weeks there, just kind of be bopping around Europe. So that's kind of the nice thing too about my business structure is I can leave for a while and still help out people from afar. But yeah, that's the biggest thing for sure.
Well, that's awesome. Congratulations. You and I will be in the newlywed camp together,
Yeah.
fighting the good fight together.
Yeah, she's
Yep.
standing behind me right now with a knife in her hand to make sure I said that right.
Yeah, yeah, I can totally see her in the reflection.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
hey, I really appreciate you hopping on today, Trey. How can people get in touch with you?
The easiest way is Instagram at athlete doc rehab. I'm pretty responsive to DMs on there. Unless you DM me saying I need one drill to fix my arm immediately, probably not going to answer those anymore. But yeah, that's probably the easiest way. Or they can shoot me an email at Trey at athletedocrehab.com too. And we can probably post that in the show notes or something like that too. So I try to be super accessible to people though. So if people ask me some questions and need some help, like I'm happy to jump on calls, text people, and just give them some pointed direction. And I always do that for free too. I'm not charging some crazy $6,000 consultation, but yeah, that's the easiest way.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that. I'll be sure to throw that in the show notes. Thanks again, Trey, and to all the listeners out there, thanks for laying back with us.